Imagine this. You're at the pinnacle of success, a self-made millionaire with the world at your feet. Private jets, sprawling mansions, and a circle of so-called friends who toast to your every triumph. But in the blink of an eye, it all vanishes into darkness. What if, after a month in a void, you open your eyes to find that the one person who never left your side isn't who you expected at all? This is the riveting tale of Alexander Voss, a man whose awakening shattered his illusions and redefined loyalty in ways no fortune could buy. Alexander Voss wasn't born with a silver spoon. He clawed his way up from the gritty streets of Chicago, turning a modest tech startup into a billion-dollar empire by his mid-40s. Voss innovations revolutionized data security, making him a darling of Silicon Valley and Wall Street alike. His life was a whirlwind of boardroom battles, lavish galas, and fleeting romances. He had a trophy wife, Elena, whose beauty turned heads and whose ambitions matched his own. There were the business partners like Marcus Hale, his right-hand man, always scheming for the next big deal. And then the entourage, the socialites, influencers, and yes-men who orbited him like planets around the sun, drawn by his wealth and charisma. But success, as Alexander often quipped in interviews, was a double-edged sword. Late one stormy night in October 2023, while racing his Ferrari along the Pacific Coast Highway after a heated negotiation, fate intervened. A slick patch of road, a momentary lapse in focus, and his world spun into chaos. The crash was catastrophic, metal twisting, glass shattering, and Alexander slipping into a coma that doctors feared might be permanent. Headlines screamed, "Tech tycoon in critical condition, empire in peril." The stock plummeted, vultures circled his assets, and the world moved on. For 6 agonizing months, Alexander lay in a private suite at Cedars-Sinai, hooked to machines that beeped like metronomes in an empty symphony hall. Elena visited sporadically at first, her designer heels clicking against the sterile floors as she whispered promises of recovery. But as weeks turned to months, her appearances dwindled. She cited board meetings, travel obligations, and the stress of it all. Whispers in the tabloids suggested she was seen dining with Marcus Hale more than once, their laughter echoing in exclusive restaurants, while Alexander's body fought silently. The nurses noted the visitors, a parade of lawyers shuffling papers, ensuring his will was ironclad. Old college buddies dropping by with awkward condolences before vanishing. Even his estranged sister from back east made a token appearance, her eyes more on the inheritance than on him. But amid the fleeting faces, one presence remained constant, a quiet figure who arrived every dawn and left only when the night shift insisted. No one knew much about them at first. They blended into the background like a shadow in the room. As the seasons shifted from fall to spring, Alexander's mind began to stir in the abyss. Fragments of memories floated by. The roar of the engine, Elena's last text message about a gala, the sting of betrayal in a deal gone sour. Then, one crisp April morning, his eyelids fluttered. The monitors spiked, alarms blared, and doctors rushed in. Alexander Voss was back, disoriented, weak but alive. His first words, raspy and faint, were a question. What happened? The room came into focus slowly. Elena wasn't there. She'd been notified but was tied up in New York. Marcus sent flowers with a note about getting back to business. But sitting by his bedside, holding a worn book and looking up with eyes full of quiet relief, was someone Alexander least expected. It was Lila, his longtime housekeeper, a woman in her late 50s who cleaned his penthouse for over a decade, invisibly managing the chaos of his life without ever asking for recognition. She'd immigrated from Guatemala years ago, sending money back to her family, and Alexander had always seen her as just part of the furniture, reliable but forgettable. "Why you?" he croaked, his voice laced with confusion, and a hint of something deeper, like the first crack in facade he'd built over years. Lila set the book down, a dog-eared copy of his favorite novel, one he'd mentioned offhand once, and smiled softly, because Mr. Voss, someone had to remember the man behind the money. As the days unfolded, Alexander learned the truth piece by piece. Lila hadn't just visited. She'd advocated for him when doctors debated pulling the plug, using her meager savings to consult specialists. She'd read to him daily, believing her voice might pierce the coma. sharing stories from her own life that echoed his struggles, loss, resilience, the pursuit of something more than wealth. While his friends had scattered like leaves in the wind, Lila had stayed, driven by a loyalty born not from contracts or expectations, but from genuine humanity. But the shocks didn't end there. As Alexander regained strength, delving into his company's affairs, he uncovered emails and records that painted a darker picture. Elena and Marcus had been plotting to seize control, forging documents during his absence. The betrayal stung like salt in a fresh wound, but it was Lila's unwavering presence that began to heal it. She revealed she'd overheard suspicious conversations in the penthouse before the accident, even suspecting foul play in the crash itself. Tampered brakes, perhaps? Alexander's mind raced. Could his empire's shadows have reached that far? Determined to reclaim his life, Alexander enlisted Lila's help in a covert investigation. They pored over files in the dead of night, her sharp memory filling in gaps he'd never noticed. What started as gratitude evolved into an unlikely partnership, with Lila becoming his confidant, her insights proving sharper than any boardroom strategist. As whispers of his recovery spread, Elena and Marcus reappeared, all smiles and false concern, but Alexander saw through the veneer now. One evening, as the sun dipped below the L.A. skyline, Alexander turned to Lila in his hospital room. "You've given me more than I ever deserved," he said, his voice steady for the first time in months. "But why? I was never kind to you. Barely knew your name." Lila paused, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of quiet strength. "Because, Mr. Voss, in all those years, I saw the boy who built this from nothing, not the man who forgot how. And sometimes we stay for the potential, not the past." Little did Alexander know, Lila harbored secrets of her own, a connection to his forgotten roots that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his origins. As they dug deeper, a hidden letter surfaced from his bedside drawer, one Lila had safeguarded during his coma. It was from his late mother, revealing that Lila wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a distant relative, sent years ago to watch over him anonymously after a family scandal tore them apart. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt, forcing Alexander to confront not just the betrayals around him, but the voids within. With newfound purpose, Alexander plotted his comeback, not with vengeance, but with transformation. He began restructuring Voss Innovations, prioritizing ethics over profits, and invited Lila to join the board, her perspective a beacon in the corporate fog. But as threats from Elena and Marcus escalated, anonymous calls warning of danger, Alexander realized the accident might have been no accident at all. Paranoia set in. Who could he trust beyond Lila? The duo hired a private investigator, uncovering a web of corporate espionage that led straight to his inner circle. Nights blurred into strategy sessions, Alexander's health improving with each revelation. Lila shared tales of her homeland, inspiring him to launch a foundation for immigrant entrepreneurs. His way of giving back. Yet, the danger loomed. A shadowy figure was spotted outside the hospital, and encrypted messages on his recovered phone hinted at a larger conspiracy involving rival tech giants. Alexander's awakening wasn't just physical. It was a rebirth, with Lila as the unlikely catalyst. As they prepared for his discharge, Alexander stood by the window, gazing at the city that once defined him. "This changes everything," he murmured. Lila nodded, her hand on his shoulder. "It already has." But just as hope flickered, a knock at the door brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus, his face pale, claiming he had proof of Elena's solo treachery and begging for forgiveness. Was a genuine olive branch or another layered deceit? Alexander exchanged a glance with Lila, the air thick with tension, as the true test of loyalty began to unfold. Marcus stood in the doorway, the overhead fluorescent light carving sharp shadows across his face. His usual tailored confidence had frayed, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot, the faint scent of expensive scotch clinging to him like guilt. In his hand, he clutched a thin manila folder, edges creased from nervous gripping. "Alex," he said, voice cracking on a single syllable. "Thank God you're awake. I've been trying to reach you through the nurses, but they wouldn't let me in until now." He glanced sideways at Lila, who hadn't moved from her chair beside the bed. Her posture was calm, but her dark eyes tracked in the way a hawk tracks movement in tall grass. Alexander felt the old instincts rise. Boardroom reflexes honed over decades of reading micro-expressions. Marcus was terrified, but not just of losing a friend. This was the fear of a man staring at consequences he couldn't outbid. "Sit down, Marcus," Alexander said quietly, "and tell me why you're really here on Christmas Day." Marcus hesitated, then dragged the visitor's chair closer, the legs scraping harshly against the linoleum. He placed the folder on the blanket, covering Alexander's legs, as though it were radioactive. "Elena's gone off the rails," he began. "Completely. After the crash. She convinced herself you weren't coming back. She started moving assets. Quietly at first, then bolder. Offshore accounts, shell companies in the Caymans. She even tried to invoke that old clause in the bylaws giving her voting control of your shares in the event of incapacity." Alexander's pulse thudded in his temples. He remembered drafting that clause himself. Late one night after too much wine, Elena curled against him, whispering that they needed to protect each other. "And you," he asked, "where were you while this was happening?" Marcus swallowed hard, trying to stop her. "I swear." But she had leverage, photos, recordings, things from years ago, mistakes I made when the company was smaller and the rules were looser. He tapped the folder. "This is everything I could pull together without tripping her alarms. Bank transfers, emails, forged medical opinions stating you were brain dead. She was days away from having a judge declare you legally gone." Lila finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "And you waited until now to bring this? 6 months of silence, Mr. Hale?" Marcus flinched. "I was gathering proof. I couldn't come empty-handed. If I'd accused her without evidence, she'd have buried me in the company with lawsuits." He looked at Alexander pleadingly. "I know how this looks. I know I should have fought harder sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm ready to testify, to hand over access to every account I control, whatever it takes to fix this." Alexander stared at the folder, then at the man he'd once considered a brother. They'd started Voss Innovations together in a cramped garage, surviving on ramen and ambition. Marcus had been the charmer, the one who closed impossible deals with a smile and a handshake. But ambition has a way of mutating, and Alexander had always sensed the hunger beneath the charm. "Open it," he said. Marcus did, spreading documents across the blanket, wire confirmations, timestamps, signatures that were unmistakably Elena's elegant scrawl. One page showed a transfer of $50 million to an account in Liechtenstein, dated 3 weeks after the accident. Another was an email chain discussing contingency plans should Alexander remain unresponsive. The clinical language made Alexander's stomach turn. But something fell off, like a painting hung slightly crooked. The dates aligned too perfectly. The phrasing was almost theatrical. He glanced at Lila, who gave the smallest shake of her head. She saw it too. "Marcus," Alexander said slowly, "who else has seen these?" "No one. I pulled them myself from the servers. Use an old backdoor admin password you gave me years ago, before we tightened security." A backdoor Alexander had personally closed 18 months earlier during a routine audit. The realization hit like ice water. Marcus was lying, or at least part of this was staged. Before Alexander could press, his phone finally returned him that morning, buzzed on the side table. The caller ID read private. He answered, putting it on speaker without thinking. "Mr. Voss," came a distorted voice, mechanical and genderless. "Congratulations on your recovery. A word of advice. Some gifts come wrapped in pretty lies. Check the metadata on those documents your friend just brought. And remember, accidents can happen twice." The line went dead. Marcus paled. That's probably Elena trying to scare you. She's desperate." But Alexander was already motioning for Lila to hand him his laptop from the drawer. His fingers, still weak, trembled as he opened the files Marcus had thoughtfully provided on a USB stick for convenience. Lila leaned over his shoulder, her presence grounding. Within minutes they found it. Embedded metadata showing the documents had been created not over the past months, but in the last 48 hours. Some were backdated expertly, but not expertly enough. Marcus stood abruptly, chair clattering backward. Alex, I can explain. Security appeared in the doorway. Two burly guards a hospital had stationed after threats started coming in. Alexander had quietly requested them that morning. Please escort Mr. Hale out, he said calmly, and notify the authorities. Corporate fraud, attempted embezzlement. I'll forward the evidence. Marcus's composure shattered. You're making a mistake. Elena will destroy everything. You need me. As the guards took his arms, he twisted, eyes wild. She's not working alone, Alex. There are bigger players, competitors who want Voss Innovations gutted. I was trying to protect you. The door closed behind him, muffling his protests. Silence settled, broken only by the rhythmic beep of monitors. Lila exhaled slowly. He may not be wrong about the bigger players, she said. That call, the voice distortion was professional grade, not something Elena could arrange on her own. Alexander rubbed his temples. The room felt smaller suddenly, the festive lights from the hallway nurse's station mocking through the window. Christmas carols drifted faintly from somewhere down the corridor. So either Marcus is playing both sides, or he's a pawn, or he's telling a half-truth to save himself. Or all three, Lila replied. She picked up the folder, flipping through it again with new suspicion. But this forged evidence, he wanted you to act rashly, to confront Elena publicly, maybe so she could counter with something worse. Alexander nodded, mind racing ahead. We need real information, not theater. He reached for his phone again, this time dialing a number he hadn't used in years. Rebecca Navarro, a former FBI cybercrimes agent who'd gone private after burning out on bureaucracy. She owed him a favor from the early days when Voss Innovations had quietly helped crack a state-sponsor hacking ring. Rebecca answered on the second ring. Voss, the rumors are true. You're back from the dead. Something like that, he said. I need your skills. Discreetly and fast. He briefed her on everything. The crash, the forged documents, Marcus's visit, the threatening call. She listened without interrupting, then said, Send me whatever you have. I'll start tracing the money and the call origin. But Alex, assume your devices are compromised. Use a burner for anything sensitive from now on. After hanging up, Alexander looked at Lila. We're leaving this hospital tomorrow. Discharge or not, I'm done being a sitting target. Lila's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure he'd seen. The doctors say you need at least another week. I've got money, private physicians, and a secure compound upstate. We'll manage. He paused, studying her face. Come with me. Not as staff, as partner. I can't do this without you. She hesitated, then nodded once. I already packed a bag. It's in my car downstairs. He almost smiled. Of course she had. That night, while the hospital slept under holiday quiet, they worked. Lila's memory proved invaluable again. She recalled odd details. A maintenance visit to Ferrari 2 days before the crash by a mechanic she'd never seen before. Elena's late-night phone calls in hushed Spanish to someone called Senor Ortega. Marcus receiving encrypted messages on a second phone he thought no one noticed. By dawn, Rebecca sent encrypted files to a new burner Alexander had delivered by courier. Preliminary findings. The threatening call had bounced through servers in Eastern Europe, but one node traced to a shell company linked to Nexus Dynamics, Voss Innovations' fiercest rival, headed by Victor Stahl, a ruthless oligarch-turned-tech mogul with rumored ties to intelligence circles. More disturbing. Brake line residue from the crash wreckage, re-examined at Alexander's request, showed traces of a rare hydraulic fluid not used in standard Ferrari servicing. Deliberate sabotage. As snow began to fall outside the window, unusual for L.A., magical and ominous, Alexander felt the pieces clicking into a larger, darker picture. Elena and Marcus weren't the masterminds. They were tools, perhaps even expendable ones. Someone wanted not just his company, but him erased. He turned to Lila. We're not just fighting for the Empire anymore. We're fighting for our lives. She met his gaze, unflinching. Then we fight smart. And together, a soft knock interrupted them. A nurse entered with discharge papers. miraculously ready a day early, courtesy of a substantial donation to the hospital foundation. Wheels were in motion. As they prepared to leave, another encrypted message arrived from Rebecca. Coordinates in a time, midnight tomorrow, at a remote airfield outside Santa Barbara. A contact with direct knowledge of Stahl's operation wanted it effect, but only if Alexander came personally. No security. No recordings. Trust no one. The message ended. Alexander looked at Lila as they wheeled him toward the private ambulance, waiting in the underground garage. The city lights blurred past tinted windows, holiday decorations twinkling like distant warnings. Midnight meeting with potential traitor or assassin, he murmured. Merry Christmas. Lila squeezed his hand. The best stories always have the darkest chapters before the dawn. The ambulance merged into traffic, heading north, while behind them unseen eyes watched from the hospital roof, a silenced rifle tracking their path until they vanished into the snowy night. The real game had only just begun. The ambulance sliced the veil of falling snow, its tires whispering secrets against the slick asphalt as it sped northward from the glittering chaos of Los Angeles. Alexander Voss leaned back against the padded gurney, his body still frail but his mind a forge of resolve, hammering out plans in the dim glow of the interior lights. Beside him, Lila sat vigilant, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a tether in the storm. The city faded in the rear view, swallowed by the night, but Alexander knew the shadows pursuing them were far from vanquished. Victor Stahl's empire loomed like a colossus in the distance, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the tech world, and now, it seemed, into his very life. As the vehicle climbed into the rugged hills toward a secluded compound in the Santa Ynez Mountains, Alexander's thoughts raced ahead to the midnight rendezvous. The coordinates Rebecca had provided pointed to a forgotten airstrip, once a hub for bootleggers during Prohibition, now overgrown and abandoned. It was the perfect stage for betrayal or revelation. "We go armed," he murmured to Lila. "Not with guns, knowledge. That's our weapon now." Lila nodded, her eyes reflecting the passing headlights like polished obsidian. She'd already contacted an old friend from her days in Guatemala, a retired intelligence operative who'd owed her a debt since smuggling her family across borders during turbulent times. By the time they arrived at the compound, a fortified estate disguised as a vineyard, reinforcements awaited, discreet drones for surveillance, encrypted comms, and a cache of digital countermeasures. Alexander marveled at her resourcefulness. This woman, whom he dismissed as mere help, was a force of nature, her life a tapestry of survival woven from threads he'd never bothered to trace. The compound's gates swung open under biometric scans, and as they entered the sprawling villa, Alexander felt a surge of empowerment. Private physicians swarmed him, administering treatments in a state-of-the-art medical wing, while Lila coordinated with Rebecca via secure video. The defector's message had been clear. Stahl had orchestrated the crash through proxies, Elena and Marcus as unwitting puppets, lured by promises of power. But the defector, a mid-level engineer named Dmitri, had grown a conscience after seeing how far Stahl would go, including silencing loose ends. Midnight approached like a thief. Under a canopy of stars piercing the cleared skies, Alexander and Lila drove to the airstrip in an armored SUV, the snow now a light dusting that crunched underfoot. Dmitri emerged from the shadows beside a rusted hangar, his breath fogging the air, a USB drive clutched in gloved hands. "Proof," he whispered, voice trembling. "Recording schematics." Stahl's plan to integrate Voss Tech into his AI weapons program. He wants global dominance, not just market share. The exchange was swift, but as Dmitri turned to flee toward a waiting prop plane, chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked the night, silent shots from hidden assailants. Alexander dug behind the SUV, pulling Lila with him, his heart pounding as adrenaline flooded his weakened frame. Dmitri crumpled, the drive skittering across the tarmac. Lila, with surprising agility, rolled forward and snatched it, returning fire with concealed pistol she'd smuggled from the compound. "Run!" she shouted, covering Alexander as they retreated to the vehicle. Tires screeched as they peeled away, pursuers in black sedans giving chase through winding mountain roads. Alexander gripped the wheel, his vision blurring from exertion, but Lila's calm directives guided him. "Left here. cut through the vineyard trails. Bullets pinged off the armored plating, the night alive with peril. In that frenzy, Alexander glimpsed the true depth of their bond. Not just loyalty, but shared fire forged in adversity. They lost the tales in the labyrinthine paths of his estate, barricading inside as security protocols activated. Motion sensors, floodlights, automated turrets. Panting in the command center, Alexander plugged in the drive. Files unfurled like a digital Pandora's box. Emails linking Stahl to Elena's offshore dealings. Blueprints for sabotaged vehicles. Even a hit list with Alexander's name crossed out prematurely. Marcus appeared in footage, sweating during a clandestine meeting, begging for mercy as Stahl's enforcers threatened his family. But the crown jewel was a video confession from Stahl himself, recorded unwittingly during a board call. Voss was an obstacle. Remove him, absorb his empire, and we control the future surveillance. It was damning irrefutable. With dawn breaking over the snow-kissed peaks, Alexander broadcast the evidence anonymously to regulatory bodies, media outlets, and international watchdogs. The fallout was seismic. By midday, headlines blared. Tech Titan exposed. Victor Stahl arrested in global conspiracy. Stocks plummeted. Empires crumbled. Elena and Marcus were detained at airports. Their pleas of innocence drowned in the tide of proof. Yet victory tasted bittersweet. In the quiet aftermath, as Alexander stood on the villa's terrace overlooking vines heavy with promise, he turned to Lila. You saved me more than once. But why hide our connection all these years? The letter from my mother, you were her cousin, sent to protect the family legacy after the scandal. Lila gazed at the horizon, where the sun painted the world anew. Your mother knew the dangers of your rise. She wanted you to succeed on your own terms, without the weight of old feuds. I stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. But when the coma came, I couldn't stand by. Loyalty isn't blood, it's choice. Alexander felt a profound shift, like tectonic plates realigning his soul. No longer the isolated tycoon, he envisioned a new path. Voss Innovations rebranded as Voss Lila Global, with her as co-CEO, channeling profits into ethical AI, immigrant aid programs, and global equity initiatives. The foundation he dreamed of blossomed, funding startups in underserved communities, turning his near-death into a legacy of life. Months later, on a balmy evening in Guatemala, Alexander stood beside Lila at her family's modest home, rebuilt with foundation grants. Children laughed in the yard, elders shared stories under string lights, and for the first time, Alexander felt truly rich, not in dollars, but in connections. Elena's trial had exposed her greed, Marcus's cowardice, but Alexander chose forgiveness, testifying to their manipulation by Stahl, who rotted in a maximum security cell. As the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, Alexander proposed a toast. To awakenings, not just from comas, but from the illusions we build. To those who stay, not for gold, but for the heart beneath. Lila clinked her glass, her smile radiant. And to second chances, where the unexpected becomes eternal. Their story rippled outward, inspiring millions, a testament that true wealth lies in unseen bonds, that betrayal's sting yields to loyalty's balm. Alexander Voss, once a solitary summit, now stood amidst a forest of allies, his life a beacon for the lost. In the end, it wasn't the empire that endured, but the humanity reclaimed, a magnificent mosaic of resilience, love, and unbreakable spirit that echoed through generations, proving that even in darkness, light finds its faithful guardian. But whispers lingered. Stahl's network was vast, and embers of vengeance smoldered. Yet Alexander and Lila faced a future undaunted, their partnership a fortress against storms. For in the grand tapestry of fate, their awakening wasn't an end, but a glorious beginning, where loyalty triumphed, empires evolved, and the human heart reigned supreme. Viewers, as you reflect on this tale, remember who stays by your side when the world fades. Cherish them, for they are the true millionaires of the soul. Subscribe for more stories that ignite the imagination, and hit that notification bell. Your next awakening awaits.